Well, good evening. I'm Mike, and I have the great pleasure of walking you through some of our initial ideas. Hopefully you've had a couple of minutes to walk through the drawings, but we're going to dive deeper. As Stephen mentioned, we're coming tonight with the opinion that there's no single right answer at this point. We're not coming here to say, vote only for one option. What we'd like to do is pull out pieces and strategies and what things in each option do you like so that we can then put it together. All of the options really try to achieve the aspects of improving access, improving activation, and attracting people and development and catalyzing it to this area. So our first scheme, we entitled Modernist Lines, recognizing that there is a long history since 1969 when the SOM buildings, the Calder and Nancy, I had the great privilege of sitting with this afternoon and hearing really the story of how Alexander Calder was selected and how that work of art really transformed your community and really serves as an identity and icon for today. So we couldn't help but sort of be inspired to think about the geometries, the cleanness, the crispness that was intended in the original plan. But how can we turn that dial so that it is more activated? So we're going to start with an overall view, and then we'll zoom in. For context's sake, this is Ottawa Street right behind you. The convention hall is on the northern or on the upper end of the page. The federal building is to the north or to the right. And then the existing parking structure is on the southern side. The county and city building, and again, we're located right up here right now with the view down into the plaza. When we took a step back, there were a couple of sort of observations that we took into consideration. One is these edges, both along the northern and the southern side, already have a soil depth that is pretty deep and can accommodate trees and is structurally planned for that. However, you really can't occupy that. There's now lawn in there, but wouldn't there be a way to sort of access that area, populate that area, use that area? So that seemed like something that could be considered in all the alternatives, is finding a way to get up into this area. The second is, in this scheme, trying to find ways to activate each roadway. So in this scheme, along Ottawa Avenue, finding ways for potentially food trucks or shade pavilions that would allow people to gather right along the street. And at the opposite end, finding ways to make the Monroe Avenue, which Stephen spoke about, more active, utilizing a retail edge along that. So at the sort of macro level scale, that's the plan. So as we zoom in, I'd like to work from basically Ottawa Avenue up. And in the GR Forward plan, there is a suggestion to make a health loop, a connection from the medical district down to the river. So this really starts with an enhanced pedestrian crossing that allows people to cross the street safely and into the plaza. This area right before the steps could be identified for food trucks, and it could change. You could set up tents, temporary food vendors, all of those. But once you grab lunch, potentially coming over on either side and sitting underneath the shade and really activating that area. On both sides, new ramps provide accessibility to the primary plaza area. And as I mentioned, the northern side and the southern side actually has uses to them now. So if you think about it right now, there are large concrete black walls that are pretty hot to sit in the winter and pretty high. And so one thought is that you would almost splay the walls back and create a series of seats along here that are integrated, but work its way up to this level. And the same could happen down on this side. And if any of you have been to, there's a wonderful project called Bryant Park in New York. It's where trees are on either side, and there's a walkway going down, and there's a series of rooms, tables and chairs, garden rooms in that. And they really find places to congregate in there. And that's what we're thinking about in there. The other aspect to this is, while leaving this area open, not only to protect visually the appearance of the Calder, but to accommodate the largest events, but on this side, bring in another grove of trees, which could be lifted, movable furniture underneath it, so there's shade, people could grab lunch, go out there. The chairs could be removed, tents could come in, or even like lawn activities in there. There is a notion of a water feature that could be a pop jet, something that kids and families could congregate around and again bring life to the space. This is a perspective view, bird's eye looking down into the space. So as I mentioned, the connection in, the architectural pavilions, the new trees in here, and then the edges, which in the original design was very intentional for the sculpture to have a backdrop of green and vegetation against it. So we're trying to adhere to that. This is a view of what it looks like this morning. It was a happening place. And the potential of this afternoon. So we'll bounce back and forth, but what you can see is the big sort of barrier concrete wall here has been peeled back and allows people to gather on there, sit on there. And then this space here, a replanting of trees with a walk and garden rooms moving down it. Okay, we're going to flip sides to the building. So on the back side of Monroe, so we're coming up through here. The first is that, again, in the GR Forward plan, it was identified must have a pedestrian connection that gets us down from this level down to Monroe, and then we can try to connect to the river in another strategy. So all three schemes show a physical connection. This shows a stairway that's basically attached to the existing wall out here. Other schemes have different strategies, but all of them connect. The second is there was a desire to potentially look at a direct connection to the convention center. So the second floor, so you would never have to cross traffic. So some schemes have it, some schemes don't, but this one does. And then there's two other aspects. One is, in all of our discussions with stakeholder groups, this area did not seem as precious visually, because you can't even see the Calder, than down in this area. So we said, well, what if we did something different? What if you brought food and beverage and actually did a beer garden and actually, brought people to that corner and sort of a pulse to that corner of the property? So that is what's proposed as a building, one story here, beer garden, Plaza games, and then on the opposite side, thinking about how there's an existing lawn of the federal building and how that could just be expanded and you could have lawn games out with restrooms and activities that could happen in that area. This is looking back. So imagine yourself on top of the convention hall. I would not do that. But, looking down, so the retail, as Stephen said, currently the stone facade is quite stark and really doesn't suggest activity and people coming over for a coffee or the convention hall traffic moving back and forth, or even the development that's happening at the Row and the university building. How can this be activated? So what we're showing, there is a very narrow area of about 30 feet between the existing building wall and the street, and that there is retail precedent to do very narrow, shallow retail that could basically sit right along here. So the existing wall is here. We're basically bringing it out and would allow us to plant on top of it. The stairway, which I mentioned, is actually cropped right off of this, but you would come and could either take the elevator down or the stairway here. And then if you were still going into the city or county building, that access is down below. Okay. Option 2, we looked at a scheme called Sculptural Grove. Everyone turns their pages. And I'll pick pace a little bit now that we hopefully have our bearings. In this instance, and Nancy spoke of it this afternoon, that there was this great juxtaposition between the black modernist buildings, crisp, modern, strict, and then the sinuous Calder sculpture, which was abstracting the rapids. And so this juxtaposition. So we said, well, could we find that in the larger plaza, where perhaps the northern edge is crisp and formal and is rigid and allows people to congregate on the stairs on here, but the south have a much more sinuous feel. And it could be in softer plantings of gardens and drifts of trees. It could be in pavilions, architectural pavilions that provide shade that would be abstracted from the forms of the Calder. So that's, in essence, the scheme 2. As we zoom in, there's a few changes in this one. The first is there is still the connection, pedestrian connection. You walk under trees, up the stairway, into the plaza. But instead of buildings here, the thought is, could we just give this green threshold that the limbs would be high enough so you wouldn't block the Calder? But this is a vegetation sort of edge that you could have tables and chairs down in that area and activate the space. The existing stairwells down to the parking garage are enhanced and elevators are added in this. And then as you move into the space, it's relatively open with the exception of 2 water bodies, which we're nicknaming sort of urban puddles. But if you think of reflecting pools or interactive water features that kids can play in, that they sit out and they almost look like large puddles in the landscape. On the south edge, we have a large pavilion that in the daytime can have tables, chairs, tents even set up. But then in the evening time or on special events, you remove those. You could set up a band. You could set up other performances that could happen down on that southern edge. As we move up, there's a walkway that works its way along the southern edge to a series of different rooms. And those could have things like bocce, badminton, tables and chairs, playground elements, all of those sort of connected down on the southern end. So this is the view looking down. Pavilion, water feature, vegetation edge, and the food truck pavilion is brought inside. Again, the happening morning it was, and what that might look like taken from the southern edge of the property. So slightly lifted, middle of the day, you can imagine these tables and chairs get removed, a band could set up, and you could congregate in front of it. On the back side, sort of sinuous move continues through the rooms, another pavilion, and then leads you to a sculptural bridge that connects over the road and drops you down to this side of Monroe. The stairway, the pedestrian stairway, is integrated in this area, but instead of the stairway attaching, as in option 1, we're thinking, could we just have as much retail as possible and activate that edge? And that's the view of option 2. So just pause for 1 second. Retail along the bottom, entry into the building, elevator down, stairway down, pedestrian bridge crossing. And third, we have a concept we're entitling urban living rooms, which is thinking like in your homes, you have a number of different rooms that provide a different use. And so could we take the concept of all of these programmed items and integrate them into the edge? So if you think about it, scheme 1 was about lifting and activating this area. Scheme 2 was sinuous. Scheme 3 takes the form of the buildings and carves out rooms all along the edge. So you could have playground, a water feature, a fantastic farm table. You could have tables and chairs under a grove. And on this side, the southern, Again, a stage and a water feature along the edge. But in this, we heard some people were suggesting a community lawn. A large lawn that still could have tents on it, still could have people congregate on it, but would bring a little bit of softness to the space. Zoom in. So this is zooming in. And one of the sort of subtle moves that we did on here was the existing axis is here with stairways, with the stair moving in. We said if we actually shifted this over just slightly, we could have a bigger area on this side that perhaps a restaurant, a coffee shop, something that would anchor, and you would have tables and chairs underneath a series of trees along the edge. So walking to work or leaving work, that this would be a great happy hour place, that this is activated at lunchtime and moving into the plaza. In here, you're moving into the event lawn, movable table and chairs. Again, the Preston at Bryant Park, all they did was colorful chairs that people occupy the lawn and catch some sun when it's not too hot. The view, so restaurant on the left-hand side, plaza open, food truck plaza in the middle, and lawn to the left. The party that was happening this morning, and the after. So this is taken looking back out to Ottawa Avenue. The restaurant in the back, the stage, which could also be a water feature when it's just turned off, a lawn area here, and the food trucks off in the distance. On the back side, I mentioned the idea of an urban playground. You know, thinking that kids occupy this area already, maybe there is a synergy between a playground area, and as more of the downtown potentially may receive residents, that there is a need for a playground in this area. So that. The second is potentially a smaller restaurant or dining or coffee shop that would anchor this corner, and a shaded tree grove that you could have tables and chairs all around this. And then thinking about the pedestrian connection. There's no bridge in this option, but just this very gracious stairway that you could even have performances, musicians set up right in this area, and people could congregate right on the stairs. So finally, the view. Looking back, so again, retail along the facade down here, pedestrian connection and stairs, elevator on that area, and then restaurant and dining up here. So with that, it's time to click.